Hi everyone. So it's 11 and I will get started with this week's webinar from DeLog. My name is Anya Paget and I work here at DeLog as an ESG and communication. Today we're going to talk about supply chain management and why that's definitely one of the keys when it comes to working in this industry, in the textile industry. Now, just for the agenda for today, I'll be talking about these many demands. So I'll give a short introduction and get everyone going in this topic and in this theme, and then talk a bit about the documentation and certifications that there are, and that is surely a part of working with your suppliers. And then in the end, I will introduce my guest for today, Anya, who is working as a CSR manager, but I'll let her introduce herself. As usual, if you have any question during the presentation or during the Q&A I'm having with Anya, feel free to pop in your questions in the Q&A section, and I'll keep track of it during the presentation as well. So if there are any questions which seems relevant to do during the presentation or with asking Anya about it, I will do that, and there will also, of course, be room in the end for that as well. So let's get started. So one of the things that I wanted to touch upon, first of all, which I think at least many of our customers are met with, and just in general, the fashion industry, the textile industry is really met with all of these different very exciting Excel sheets, overviews of so many data points, so many different things that they need to report on, that they need to deliver. And one of the things that I think is really important is to sort of think about the fact that, you're being asked of all of these things in terms of legislation. So it's this trickle-down effect that comes from these different key account customers or other stakeholders that have an interest in asking you about all of this information. It's a lot of legislation requirements, but it's also a general information requirement that we are met with, and that our customers are really being met with as well. Now, luckily, of course, they share all of this with us. So they share all of these Excel sheets with us and these demands with us, so that we're able to see what we can do as a platform, but also what's needed in general to support. It is these retailers, these big retailers and platforms are really met with these due diligence process needs. So they have to do their due diligence in order to report. And a part of their due diligence is, of course, asking their suppliers, which are the brands, for all of this different information requirements. Now, the best way, of course, and the only way in many cases to actually get all of that information is by asking your suppliers. So by utilizing your supply chains, that's the only way in many cases where you can have all of this information, get all of this information. So it's really a matter of having them as a part of the working progress. They're having them as a part of your work when you sit and have all of these demands. Now, some of the ways that is where you're able to work with the documentation, and many in the industry are focusing a lot on this as well, is of course to work with certifications, where you have this chain of custody, where you can work with the different documentation throughout the chain. So you have all the way from the farm and until the brand and retailers, you can actually get all of the documents to support that chain of custody. So it's really a matter of seeing where can I get this documentation, who can deliver this documentation, and that's of course the supply chain. So it's also a matter of looking at the supply chains. It's a matter of looking at how can you work with your supply chains. Can you make them shorter so that it's actually so it's easier at least to get all of this. The longer supply chains, the harder it is to get as much, it's more documentation that you need, and the harder it'll be, the traceability, etc. So it's a matter of just, you're just being very reliant on the fact that these collaborations that you have, that's the way that you can get the documentation, the certifications, etc. It's this reliant fact that is very important to keep an eye on. Now, that is also because there are so many different things that also make it very difficult. There are very many things in the textile industry that really makes it difficult to have this collaboration, that makes it difficult to ensure that you have a good relationship with your suppliers. It is a fast-paced industry. It is an industry that has a need for something to move really fast. Now, if you move things fast, it's also a place where you don't have the time, you don't have the resources to collect the necessary documentation and to work with your suppliers to ensure that that is actually something that they can help you with. Because you have many seasons, many collections, extremely many styles that will become the focus, because that's a part of the business model, that's a part of the business plan of a textile company. But that also requires that you're using a lot of time on that, and has to rely on the fact that you need suppliers that can support you in that. You also have a necessity for cheap prices in many cases. That's also something that the industry, of course, is met with. Many changes during the development and changing suppliers due to changing needs. And that can just be that you need different types of fibers, different types of workmanships, different types of garments or products. But that still creates a need for you to work very, very closely with your suppliers that you are using, so that you can, alongside this fast pace, many seasons, a lot of styles, a lot of resources being used on that, alongside you can actually create a supply chain and a group of suppliers that you can trust to help you in the process of wanting all of the data points, wanting all of the documentations, and so on. So as said, the documentation relies on collaboration. And this collaboration has an impact on three different, well, at least that's what I'm trying to showcase here, that it has an impact on three different places for a company, for a textile company. Now, of course, the business impact of that is all of these. If you don't have the good collaboration, there is a risk in terms of these missed deadlines and deliveries. And that, of course, has a business impact on your company, because it leads to these lost sales and disruption of the supply chain. If you can't deliver on time, you risk the fact of customers not wanting your garments, wanting your products. There is also a risk of increased transportation costs, because in the end, you would need to maybe change the shipping method if the collaboration isn't good, if the collaboration, if you're not able to have a close collaboration with your suppliers, that can have an impact on whether they can deliver on time, finish the production on time, which means that will also you will need to shift the shipping method, maybe from sea to air, and that's more expensive. And there is a risk of the shortage. That's also a very big risk in terms of production shortage. So that's missed sales and customer dissatisfaction. Now, the social impact, which a supplier collaboration can have, is of course poor working conditions. If you don't have a close collaboration, and I have to emphasize the fact that that's a collaboration. So that means not only having suppliers that you can trust, working with your suppliers, but also having your own practices support that collaboration. So it's a joint venture of collaborating as a brand, as a company, and with your suppliers. So it's a joint venture. That's really important to emphasize. And that, of course, has a social impact, because if you as a company have unfair requirements, short lead times, cheap prices, etc., you have a bad influence perhaps on the social compliance of or responsibility of your suppliers. So that's poor working conditions, unregulated factories. That also has to do with the whole documentation. If you can't collect if they don't have the documentation, if they don't perform social audits, etc., there is a risk of child labor, unsafe conditions, and unfair wages. And of course, the overtime, that is also a big thing in the industry. There is a lot of overtime happening. And as being a person that has been a buyer and a supply chain manager, I've traveled in very many countries to very many production facilities. And of course, I know overtime is something that in many cases is they do it, and they don't see it as a problem. So of course it's again back to the fact that it has to be a close collaboration with the suppliers to ensure that overtime is something that they are aware of, that they work responsibly with, but also with respect to the fact that workers actually sometimes do want the overtime. So it's a very it's a difficult place to be, but it's also something that you have to be aware of. And social audits, of course, are also very aware of this when they come. So that an overtime is also very much a result of a bad collaboration, because if you as a company have bad buying practices where you don't give the right amount of time, realistic time for production, if you and thereby, you know, they have to shorten their lead time, they have to shorten their production time, which ultimately, if they want the order and if they want to be your collaborator, then that will result in overtime. So so that is something that is also, it's very impactful that you can change your buying practices to actually support that overtime at least doesn't happen too much. And then, of course, the environmental impact. So this whole, if your practices and the collaboration, that can, of course, if it's not good and if it's unplanned and maybe also a shorter collaboration, that can result in things that can, of course, harm the environment. Overproduction and too many samples, which is also in many cases something that very much happens, that you create too many samples in the process, the sample process. And the other thing is, of course, air freight, because as mentioned in the business impact, that also, of course, has an impact on the environment if you switch from one type of transportation to another, which is more harming for the environment. So that, of course, is something taken into consideration, especially when you talk about your own buying practices. And I'll also come into that with Anya a bit later. Now, I just wanted to touch upon the fact that, of course, as mentioned earlier, certifications do have a role when we work with suppliers. Certifications are not 100% bulletproof. I myself and others has, of course, experienced the fact that certifications do have, there are risks as well, so even though you work with certifications, but at least it's something to go ahead with, and it's something that you can at least rely on the fact that they do have audits and there is a chain of custody. So I think in many cases, certifications is the best option as we have of now. And there are so many different ones to choose from and in different categories. So we've tried to create sort of this overview. And if you want, I've put in a QR code. You don't have to scan it now. You can scan it later when we send the presentation to you. So the QR code takes you to a larger overview that we've created with all of different certifications that we could come up with, and there are probably more than those, but we're trying to extend it as we go along and new certifications arise. But at least there are very many of the ones that are mostly known in the fashion industry and in the textile industry in general. So we have the company certifications, and those are also the sort of the social audits that you have. Many of them performed once a year, some of them not that much, but at least they come out and they check the facility for social audits, social responsibility on those facilities. So that is the working time, etc. There are the product certifications, many of whom also have social audits. So they check, for example, the GOT certification also check in terms of social responsibility. They have a large amount of that. And as far as I remember, the 7.0, which came out last year, also included due diligence processes. So they do also evolve with the industry, evolve with the different demands, legislations, etc. So that means that all of the ones that have the GOT certifications also has to comply with that. And then you have the technical standards, which are the testing standards of different parameters that you could think of. You also have that in the GOT certification, but you can also have them separated if for rainproof or peeling or whichever. So all of these different types of course certification very much used in the textile industry, supporting it. And now I would like to present Anya, who then needs to, of course, turn on her camera and microphone. Now I'll just also stop sharing here. So, oops, here we go. So, welcome, Anya.
Thank you.
Thank you
Kenya
so
as
much.
well.
Yes, exactly. Anya and Anya coming to you live. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with me. So today, the topic of supply chain management. Now, I wanted, first of all, just to, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself, especially because that underlines why you are here today. So tell us a bit about your experience that you have.
Yes. Well, nice to be here. Thank you. I am Anja Heikendorf. I work with CSR since 11 years by now. Mostly set on the in a brand perspective, where I worked with CSR for fashion brands. Now I am at Magasin du Nord, a big retailer based here in Copenhagen. And here I sit mainly with our private label products, but have in general the responsibility for products also sold in Magasin, where we are working on the strategy for our other partners who might be in this webinar as well, what we're going to require from them, or how we're going to lay our strategy there.
That's really interesting. Wow, that's really interesting. So I think also many in your job as creating these strategies for what you will be requiring in general, it's also quite nice to think about the fact that you can have that supplier view as well, right? When you create that.
Exactly, because we all know that it's really, really depending on who you work with. And we also know, which I find a really, really very interesting time we are at the moment, because now we all, and it may be us as private label brand, but it may also be all of you, are met with demands we have never been met before. So that's a little bit of a feeling what our suppliers are actually dealing with since many, many years. Because demands can vary and the phrasing of demands can vary, and it can take you a lot of work just to figuring out what the actual demand is. And I find that's a very, very interesting point of time to be in at the moment, because actually we get to experience exactly what our suppliers have experienced over the last many years.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, taking our own medicine suddenly, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Can we maybe zoom in a bit on the supply chain management that you work with now, and talk a bit about the which processes, politics, etc. have you tried to implement? Maybe you're still on the road of implementing as of now.
Yeah, Magasin already luckily had a very solid, how you say, base, where it was actually, of course, we do have a code of conduct, but it was also embedded in our production agreements and in our supplier manuals, that we do have requirements for transparency in the supply chain, that we do require social auditing for all our tier 1 partners in the supply chain, that we prohibited subcontracting to the fullest. And we need to be aware of when subcontracting takes place. We have now started to connect factories to products, because again, our data was in an Excel sheet far away from the products we are doing. And I'm used to have an overview to really see which not only suppliers but factories are producing for us, and who produces the most. I find it very important to add numbers, because that comes to a very crucial thing, which is leverage, because it's important for us to know how much leverage we can actually have at a supplier, which we, by the way, always call partner, because it gives a total different standing. How much leverage we can have at our partner. in regards to all the requirements we might send to their side. We are at the moment looking into phrase a responsible business conduct, which is like the how you say husband or the wife of the code of conduct. And the responsible business conduct shall actually define requirements to us as the buying party, what we're going to focus on when we buy our products to our suppliers and partners. And that's how to say a kind of document exchange, so that we not only send requirements the one way, but that we also commit to certain purchasing practices the other way.
Very nice. Can you mention some of the topics that you have discussed in putting into this under this? For example, I think it's really interesting that you focus on your own practices as well. Can you mention some of the topics that you've discussed?
Well, of course, one is the awareness of how we actually build our supply chain, but also how we build our collection, because we, of course, have to be aware when building our collection what that might require from our partner. May it be just on the fabric and trim stage, but also on the production facility. So our team with the responsible business conduct will have a more guidance actually on considerations that are done in the design and in the starting process. It will, of course, also kickstart some internal processes on like supplier ranking and, like I say, adding numbers to adding styles to facilities and adding styles to the supply chain hand by hand. We are actually also, of course, looking into own cease delays that may come because of collection change, because then we do have a very, how you say, strong product supplier agreement with our suppliers. But with the responsible business conduct, of course, we do want to take the responsibility for delays that are caused by our side. Yep. And not by the side of the supplier. So I have worked with it before in another brand, and I could feel that it was also really a big relief for our partners when we can present the document, because they can feel that it's finally an eye-to-eye conversation we are having with them, being aware of mistakes we can make that lead to pressure points in their supply chain.
That's amazing. So your partners have really responded good as of now, or no, of course they don't know the one that you
No,
have.
the ones at Magazine not, but it was in a preview role.
They responded.
Yeah, and then
how the current partner base that you have now, how do they respond to the way that you work with them as of now?
Well, again, I think Magazine really has done a good job with committing to fixed partners. So of course they are used of it. I think they are really also educated. And as soon as we come with the product, the supplier comes proactive, because immediately with the feedback that this requires a new production facility and the new production facility audit report. So it really becomes a very standard procedure for them, as they send prices, to send the documentation we require. Another huge step we are doing at Magazine is that we are concentrating on fully certified products, because we know that there is a chain of custody laying behind it. We are now already up to 70% of our collection for our Magazine du Nord garment clothing collection that live up to fully certified requirements. But we're going to expand that, because we know that that's the only way to increase the transparency in our supply chain, because at least the data is laying there behind somewhere.
Exactly. Nice. So if we take it out a bit further, and also taking into account that you have many years of experience also prior to Magazine with working with suppliers, why do you think it's so important to have a focus of that? You know, in general, in a company, you have a main business focus of creating products, but why is it so important to focus on supply chain management as well?
Yeah, because like you managed it before, it's actually also really a business case. It is, because when you are connected to in one way to another, you are more willing to negotiate. And you also do have the stability that you know that orders are coming again and again. So that's the pure business case that gives you a better place of negotiation when you have to negotiate. And as you say, price is an important topic, but it shall not be unlimited how much we can push. So it also has to kickstart an open dialogue when prices actually become unhealthy, and suppliers do not open this dialogue when there is no relation. So in that way, it's very healthy for the whole business case, but it's also extremely mandatory for social compliance or for CSR in general. Yeah, and actually it also, how to say, when it makes it possible that the team involves way more into CSR, because otherwise CSR often has the tendency to be separated in a corner of a team, and it's really difficult to come in. But when you try to tackle actually and make the awareness of the supply chain and cut the supply chain as much as you can, and also connect your buyers and your designers to partners, then there's a total different awareness of CSR. And I think we all do know that it's funny in the fashion industry that some suppliers actually follow designers or sources, which is really normal because everyone has their favorites. And that's, of course, fine enough. But at the same time, it does need a little bit of a commitment from the brand itself to let the supplier know that even if your favorite colleague might leave, we're still able to continue the journey.
No.
That's an important role.
So that also brings me to my next questions of these long-term partnerships. So one thing is working structured in the company with supply chain management, but it also depends a lot on it being long-term, right? So can you maybe emphasize a bit, because I know Magazine has worked a long time with their suppliers. What impact does that have?
Yeah, like I said, it really actually becomes a real partnership. It does. You can actually grow together. You can make growing plans together, which helps the factory to stay on board, and which also helps us to reach our goals that we have. And it, like I say, it just brings the whole communication of CSR to another level, because they do know the way Magazine works on the, how you say, baseline. We are now starting actually to call in our suppliers for webinars to make them aware of the legislation that is ahead, and just to let them know we're going to require way more data. We don't know which one exactly, but there's going to come a lot of it, and to also have them on board why we why we upgrade our material strategy, why we now add factories to products, why we are at the moment trying to build like data tunnels so that they are there, and that actually when we know exactly what kind of data has to come, that it can be provided. So it's for us also really important to now already onboard our suppliers. And again, it's long-term suppliers. So we are over the stage of talking about need of social compliance audit. They are aware of that. They had good experience with it. They had the experience that we never, how to say, snook around our partner to a factory directly. There is a matter of trust. So we believe that it will help us a lot, also with the legislation, that they are willing to share all the data and all the very, how you say, important topics that we need in the future.
Yeah, especially because you are, as we've both mentioned now, is that this whole requirement of legislation is so dependent on the supply chains. You know, the suppliers of the many brands that are getting all of these requirements. That is just really something that only the suppliers can come with, right? Both on style level, component level, of course, supply chain level, etc. So it's that's the reliability right there, in a nutshell, right? But I think what we can then also maybe talk a bit about is why is it then so difficult? Because we also are aware of the fact that many are not focusing on this. And I know that there's many reasons for it. Can you maybe mention, in your experience, what have you come across that makes it hard to focus on it?
Yeah, because it is, of course, at the end, we all know those sales meetings where some pieces die, and some new wishes suddenly pop up very late in the process. So of course there is a demand from the market, and the market is in that way, how you say, shown through our sales agent or our sales staff. So here again, it becomes so important to have a strategy that is embedded in the brand, and to get also the sales staff on board of the strategy and the necessity. And even though it's not their, how you say, main focus, but it is also really important to give them a little insight of the complexity of a supply chain, and actually what happens if you play around in one part of the supply chain, how the whole outcome can be. So I think it's very, very necessary to have an open dialogue, because that is of course what brings what jeopardizes the whole approach. Of course, there's also political situations that can really stress the supply chain, or geographical situations like we saw with the earthquake in Turkey. But in that point, it's just really, really super important to stay with your suppliers, and also, how to say, maybe take some of the delays on your own charges, or at least help them in the way. Because again, that's the commitment of partnership, that you go through thick and thin. And there are actually situations in our supply chains, and they are coming more and more within the last years, that really make it difficult for goods to arrive at the time that we planned them to arrive. Yeah, I think and many, how you say, they are just forced so much by delays that can happen, and by the penalties that they are facing, that they are just trying to rush goods home, and as soon as a supplier can't deliver the price, or can't deliver the lead time once, then can already be a little bit of a deal breaker. And not to say that everyone is holy. Of course, we also have to turn around. We have to meet delivery dates, and we have to meet prices. Yep. But negotiation and talk about that is just a total different point of view when there's a close relation.
Yeah, true. And final question until I open up if there are any questions. I wanted to know, you also mentioned that right now we're really experiencing what our suppliers have been experiencing for many years now. What do you think, like, the future of this? Let's try and look into the future of how do you think it will be in the future with this collaboration between a brand and their suppliers? How do you think the future looks for it?
I think it will automatically lead to the fact that so brands are choosing at least a core of main suppliers, which many of course already do, but I think it will strengthen to meet the requirements. I believe when all the legal requirements are coming, I already prepare for 3-4 years of total chaos. Because I believe that again, interpreting the requirements from brand to brand and transporting the message further, that will lead to some chaos. And like we are now at the moment standing in, we all know something is coming. We don't know exactly how it will be put out, but I believe in the long run that it of course will really smoothen the process. And I really do think that, yeah, topics like transparency, open up the supply chain, having certified materials, or at least validated materials with origin, will be just a day-to-day practice, and it will become as normal as we're going to ask for prices, and as we're going to ask for lab tips and things like that. It will be a part of the process. But to get there, I believe we're all going to experience a turbulent time.
Yes.
Yeah.
A bit of chaotic time, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so there aren't any questions actually. Maybe I have either asked you all of the questions, or your answers at least have been very, very thorough. So what I will go ahead and do now is, instead I will try and figure out there we are. I will share my screen again. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Niels, do we see it? Or do we not? We see it. Yes. And then I will just turn to the next page. Now, if you want to get in contact with Anja, I've also put her LinkedIn, of course. And then I just wanted to use this last few minutes to do a bit of promotion for the next webinars we have. The QR code leads you to where you can join the webinars and sign up for them. So next week, we're going to have 2 webinars, one on Wednesday, which is a German webinar where my colleague Aisha will show you some of the new things that we have in our platform. So that is the batch messaging and the reporting that we've created so that you can take as much data out combined with all of the compliance data in our platform, and use that to, for example, send to magazine or others. So that's going to be in German. If you are interested in hearing about these things in English, there is, of course, an on-demand webinar as well about the same. And you can find that on our website as well. Thursday next week, we will have a more product-related webinar that's going to be hosted by Pernille. And she is then going to take these reports that I just mentioned that we've created from the Delog platform. They go out to an Excel sheet so that you can further move them along. Now, Pernille is going to dive into a more nerdy Excel sort of thing, because we know that many of these different requirements coming, these very big Excel sheets, they are also very different because their reporting, chosen reporting topics are of course different. So it makes sense. But that also makes it a bit difficult to just make it automized, which means that you, in some cases, need to do this VLOOKUP situation from 2 Excel sheets and so on. So Pernille will actually show how that is done next week in a webinar as well. And you can ask her many questions about it. She knows a lot about the reports as well. So if there's any questions about that, feel free to join us on that webinar. Both of them, of course, able to sign up if you follow the QR code or just go to our website in the resources. Great. So that was it for today, Anja. So thank you so much for joining me today. Pleasure as always. And until next time, I wish you all a great weekend when you get there. Thank you so much.